If I asked you to think of the highest grossing movie of all time, the first to come to mind would surely be Avengers Endgame, right? The 11-year-long, 23-film culmination of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's first 3 phases and a fitting and satisfactory end to the whole Infinity Saga. Surely, with the current climate of streaming services, non-stop franchises, and increasingly high amounts of media consumption, this keystone to a franchise long ingrained in modern pop culture would surely be the film to comfortably hold that top spot. Well, it was for a time, until a few months back when China decided to re-release James Cameron's Avatar as a means of getting people back into the cinema, netting itself another whopping $41 million over its brief stay, bringing the film's total earnings to an absolutely staggering $2.8 billion, and effortlessly reclaimed its previously held top spot. And with the sequel to the 2009 sci-fi epic looming on the horizon, good old Jim surprised everyone with another re-release of the film in the West, fully remastered into 4K high dynamic range with a shockingly short 2-week runtime. Now, you all know me as an avid lover of sci-fi and fantasy, so naturally I was in that cinema seat as soon as I was physically able, and I've got some thoughts and opinions on it as well as the potential franchise it seems to want to set up, so I thought I'd get those out there before the sequel arrives any day now to make me eat my words. So how was this stunning 4th re-release of a movie that came out in 2009, you ask? Pretty great, actually. The screening I saw was packed and it felt like I'd been transported back to when I sat down in the movie theater and saw it for the first time. It was a much simpler time back then. Everyone was enjoying Modern Warfare 2, Russia was threatening to cut off gas to Europe, we were still recovering from a major epidemic, and we'd all decided to go to the cinema to watch James Cameron's latest movie. Maybe time really is a flat circle. The film has held up fantastically. I've always loved it, and this remaster did everything it needed to for me. The visuals popped more than you ever thought they could, with the colours and spectacle feeling on a completely different level from before, and the use of 4K made some of these close-up scenes feel way more intimate than they had any right to be. You know, it just occurred to me, I think this film is where it all started for me. It was this exact moment here where something awakened in young Nefri for tall and strong women. And also aliens, but we don't need to talk about that one. The film's environmental message comes across as strong as it did when it first released, and with the inclusion of additional scenes and slight alterations to the ending, finds a way to set itself up for the future while still ending on a strong and powerful note, if one with slightly less staying power than before now that we know we'll be seeing these characters again. The story elements can still be poked fun at even after all this time, with the ever ongoing joke about the creatively named unobtainium, and the plot, while still very basic from a narrative point of view, the added hindsight that a sequel is finally releasing did change a lot of my perception going into it. No longer can I view it as a singular entity, and more so the beginning of one story in a much larger narrative, the beginning of a much larger hero's journey, making certain characters or scenes stand up more than they did previously, as well as making the world of Pandora feel much larger and way more alive. And hell, I'll admit it, it got me hyped for the sequel no matter how much time has passed since it first came out. With that being said, I've seen a lot of people talking about how they feel like 13 years' time is way too long to stay invested in a story before it gets a sequel. And I would agree with you if not for the fact that Top Gun Maverick just released over 36 years after the original Top Gun. And not only is that film in competition for my best film of this year, but it's also the 11th highest grossing movie of all time, and it's not even 7 months old. But also consider the fact it is James Cameron directing, and he made both Judgment Day and Aliens, each 7 years after their respective originals. One of those films being a perfect mix of action, suspense, drama, and probably the only film that has successfully subverted audience expectations, making it one of, if not the best sequel of all time, and the other being so good and expanding on what came before into an entirely new genre that many consider it to be even better than the original. When you break it down, he's kind of the sequel guy. And for the monumental technical undertaking The Way of Water seems to be performing, it really is no surprise it's taken this long to release. Motion capture is inherently a demanding and complicated medium where one small interruption in the capturing process can lead to a model not tracking correctly, which can only further lead to more issues down the line. But when it works, it really works. Just look at Andy Serkis's work as Caesar in the most recent Planet of the Apes trilogy, or even Benedict Cumberbatch's Smaug from the Hobbit movies. Now imagine you decide to combine combine this complicated process with a giant swimming pool in order to shoot primarily underwater for added realism. Light refraction be damned, you're going to run into some problems. Whereas 2018's Aquaman went with intensive wire work with digitally added floating hair, and the upcoming live-action Little Mermaid seems to be adding a dark blue hue to everything and calling it a day, James Cameron wanted his scenes to have just enough added realism to them that you could feel yourself being further immersed into the world, but he needed the tools to be able to do so. So you can only imagine how much of a pain it was trying to capture smooth motion through an environment actively fighting against you, especially when you have to wait for the technology you need to, you know, exist first. But after all this waiting, just look at this. I can physically count all the pores on this blue man cat hentai hair thing's face. And as if this year didn't feel enough like a blast from the past, The Way of Water also sees the first major return of 3D to the cinema, and man, it feels weird to say that. For the pioneering that the original Avatar did for the use of the 3D format, it still remains one of the only films to utilize the system correctly. It added a depth to everything you saw rather than what every other 3D film seems to be doing, which is making things jump out of the screen at you. After the initial boom of home 3D systems shortly following Avatar's release, they just sort of died off slowly, as everyone realised nothing was really worth watching in the format besides the odd select film now and then, and having to wear a pair of specialised glasses all the time was just plain uncomfortable or impractical for those with less than perfect eyesight. Do I think after The Way of Water we'll see a resurgence in 3D televisions like in 2009? Not in the slightest, but it's nice to see he's sticking to his guns on a format he believes holds a lot of untapped potential. A lot of people like to bring up the fact that Avatar, despite being the highest grossing movie of all time, has had zero cultural impact on the world, and that's quite a bold, if not accurate statement. This has been constantly argued back and forward since the movie came out, with James Cameron himself recently going on record to say the only reason Avatar doesn't have as much cultural significance as the MCU is because the franchise only has one movie for the time being. But no matter how you spin it, Jim, that's not true in the slightest. Talk to any stranger on the street and ask them what they think of Avatar, and I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10 their response will be, I think the show is fantastic. My favourite character is Zuko. And when you correct them to say you're talking about the movie, their response will be, oh, you mean the one with the tall blue people? Now, The Legend of Aang is a 10 out of 10 masterpiece that everyone should watch, but it also first aired all the way back in 2005 and has persisted in people's minds till the present day. The same goes for the likes of The Room or The Shawshank Redemption. These forms of singular media are instantly recognisable to the vast majority of the general public, either through cultural osmosis or the mere fact of how good or bad they are is what makes them memorable. And the key fact here being that there's only one of them. And yet, when you bring up the name of the highest grossing movie of all time, rather than any of the characters, the first thing that comes to people's minds is the face of this child with an arrow on his head.
That's rough, buddy.
Jim, just face it. Your movie doesn't even break 300 posts on Rule 34 for Neytiri, and I should know. I had to look for them just to make this point.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
If even the internet of all places doesn't want to make porn of your creation, can it really be considered that good or memorable? No matter how you spin it, you can't say that your burgeoning franchise only having one movie is the reason why people don't remember it, because Martin Scorsese's Goncharov doesn't even exist, and that's had hundreds, if not thousands of memes made about it, with the man himself joining in on the joke. However, if we go purely off the impact at the box office, then yes, James Cameron does quite comfortably smother Avengers Endgame on either side of the Billboard charts, and those positions don't seem to be moving anytime soon. But at least his film had the decency to bring more attention to Zoe Saldana, who through her fantastic skills as an actress has rocked her way up to the #1 and 2 highest grossing spots in the box office, and all she primarily had to do was hue shift her character from blue to green. Many of you might not remember this, but she was a pretty fun character in the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Remember Anna Maria? Because I certainly do. Sam Worthington, who played the main character of Jake Sully, also saw great success from the first film, where he starred as a man down on his luck, signing his name over to a shady megacorporation who transferred his consciousness into something more than human. And after this, he went on to star in such memorable films as Terminator Salvation, where he played a man down on his luck who signed his name over to a shady megacorporation who transferred his consciousness into something more than human. Or how about The Titan, where he played a man down on his luck who signed his name over to, I'm starting to think this man man has been typecast. If there's one thing about the sequel that does concern me, it's that there's been over 3 trailers released for it by now, and not a single one seems to give away any plot points at all. And I wouldn't normally consider that a bad thing, especially since modern film trailers basically spoil the entire movie these days. But for a sequel to a film heavily criticised for its basic plot, you would think that they'd at least offer a small glimpse of hope that it won't end up like the first one, especially with all the interviews Cameron is doing lately telling us all how great the film is before we've even had the chance to see it yet. From what I could gather from the trailers, the film does look interesting and offering us something new with the humans returning and the family aspect, and while I appreciate what he might be attempting to set up, I draw the line at them getting rid of the papyrus font. My closing thoughts on the matter are varied, but are as such. The first Avatar movie to me was a phenomenal experience in the cinema. Getting to see a director bring to life a world that he had always envisioned was mind-blowing to me back then. Seeing such a positive response to this, James Cameron went ahead and announced that there would be more films in this world to come, but due to the combined factors of waiting for technology to advance to a level he was satisfied with, and then the world closing down for several years due to a pandemic, the delays led to a lot more people growing more fed up and dissatisfied with the idea of waiting any longer for this supposed sequel. And despite all the negativity you see online with people complaining about the original film, I am looking forward to the Avatar sequels, though let's just see how well 2 performs before you start announcing 6 and 7 there, Jim. I believe that The Way of Water may offer James Cameron a new lease of life on a franchise that has fallen behind competitively in its field. This may be the sci-fi franchise many people weren't expecting themselves to fall in love with, but only time will tell whether Timmy on Twitter was right about no one caring, or whether the re-emergence and reimagining of this soon-to-be sci-fi blockbuster franchise was way past due and will leave us pondering just what to expect what the future of Pandora might be.